Welcome to the Working Moms Podcast, featuring inspiring stories and resources for the modern working mom. I'm your host, estate planning attorney, investor, and pregnant mama-to-be, Pam Moss. All right, today's guest is Alexis King. She is a working mom and candidate for Jefferson and Gilpin County's District Attorney's Office and for the actual elected DA position. Thank you so much for being here today, Alexis.
Good to see you, Pam. Thanks for having me.
I would love to start with your background and kind of what led you to run for office.
I never thought I would run for office, I guess, is the beginning. I got into prosecution because I worked in a domestic violence and sex assault nonprofit after my undergrad down in Colorado Springs, which is where I grew up, and really saw from a bird's eye view and, all on down to the personal level, how much the decision-making of a prosecutor could impact kind of the safety and well-being of a survivor. And so that is what took me to law school. At the University of Denver, I clerked after law school for a district court judge in Denver, and then was hired by Jeffco. I spent 10 years in the office. The first 5, I prosecuted everything that came through the door and did some very serious cases, and was working on a homicide and a school shooting when I was pregnant with my first child, and really was frustrated that we weren't as outcome focused as maybe was warranted or needed. There wasn't room for that conversation. And I moved to the juvenile unit for the next 5 years and really focused on issues for kids in the community, which was much more collaborative, outcome focused, and really asking, how do we want this person to be in our community? And found it's very rewarding. Worked on diversion programs to keep kids out of the justice system, and then was the human trafficking prosecutor. After the 2016 election, I was recruited by the Denver County Court to work as a magistrate judge, and there again worked on outcome-focused programs like bail bond reform to make sure that they weren't over-incarcerating people based on poverty, mental illness, addiction, and also trying to address bias. So I'd done all of this work and never thought of myself as running, was wearing, a black robe and apolitical at that point. But I saw at the time 4 men put their hands up to be the next district attorney, and they were talking about things that they thought a DA should do. And I frankly have done that work in the courtroom, in the community, really addressing problems head on. And I frankly just started talking to my network about what that would look like. And there wasn't an obvious path for a woman to run for district attorney. In Colorado, there's 22 elected district attorneys. At any given time, there's usually only 1 or 2 that are women. I'm a Democrat, and there are even fewer who are Dems. And so it really was, frankly, forging out on my own with a lot of support. So that's why I decided to run. I really care about this community. It's where I raise my kids, and it's where I've done the majority of my professional work. And so that's why it made sense for me.
I love that. And there was a few things that you mentioned that I kind of wanted to just highlight. And one was, kind of your background and how it started from you, kind of your interest in the law, and specifically in the DA's office from working at kind of that nonprofit and really seeing the impact that this office made for survivors. And it sounds like domestic violence, sexual assault survivors. And then when you got actually into the office and was a prosecutor and worked in that area, were there things that surprised you? Were there things you didn't expect, kind of coming from that nonprofit background and then stepping into those shoes?
I think community-based advocates really always focus on what a survivor kind of needs and wants. And I think generally prosecution is more paternalistic in how they approach needs and wants. And so, it was definitely a shift. Beyond that, I came from a nonprofit organization, and volunteered in a number of nonprofits before becoming a DA, where it was really collaboratively focused and consensus-based leadership. And certainly a DA's office is very hierarchical in its traditional form. And so those are two things that always stood out to me. I also came from, organizations that were led by women. And of course, these offices are, there is not usually as much.
Oh, it looks like you muted there for a second. I think you were saying something about DA's offices. It sounded like you were saying kind of the difference between nonprofits that are run by women and a lot of DA's offices aren't run by women. They're run by men. And do you want to talk about that for a moment?
No, yes. I mean, that is the essence of it, right? I think that that is in the nutshell is just a different leadership style, obviously a hierarchy, and larger. It's a larger organization as a whole. In Jeffco, it's probably over 120 attorneys and staff, probably closer to 140 actually. And, nonprofits tend to be smaller, maybe a bit more agile in that way because they are smaller. And so, yeah, I think there's some big differences, but ways to learn from both.
So you also mentioned at one point when you were kind of talking about your background that you remember being pregnant with your first child and taking on a really important case. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I actually had two going at the same time. I was 6 months pregnant when the first one went to trial, which was a school shooting. And afterwards, started having complications because of the stress and intensity of that work, and had to step back from the homicide that I was working on. And it was the first time in my life that I had to make a decision that was frankly based on the needs of someone I hadn't met. And it was a real shift, I would say, for me as a professional. And, at the time, I wasn't sure, what I was doing. And I did the right thing for him. But I think that that's, for us type A's that go through life and achieve and work hard, you want to leave it all on the field. And so that was a big shift for me, but a good learning experience.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think there's probably some people in the audience listening who are kind of struggling with some of those decisions. And I know I am 38 weeks pregnant right now. Can't tell on the screen. And I'm not in a school shooting trial right now, but I'm running a firm and I've definitely had to make some of those tough choices. So it definitely makes me just feel better hearing kind of that you made that shift, and as someone who is so inspiring to me and has accomplished so much in your career. So thanks for sharing that, Alexis.
Yeah, I think the more we talk about things like this, it becomes a bit more normalized and okay to talk about. And I think that's incredibly important, especially, if we have more women coming out of law school, we need to be able to give them the space to continue to mature and go through life in our legal community and excel, and also flex, right? For when they are able to do the 80 hours a week and be in trial and be on their feet all day, and when they can't. But there's so much talent in the legal community in Denver, and women especially, where we need to have the ability to be flexible in the workplace.
Have you thought about a little bit about, when you're elected, I'll say when you're elected, how kind of women will be treated in the office, and kind of, because the role of a deputy district attorney, I was a former deputy district attorney as well. And the role is a role that is very time intensive. It's very high stress. And you are someone who really kind of has forged through it, created a path for others. And have you thought about, if and when you're at the top, kind of what policies and procedures are going to kind of set as leadership for other women coming behind you or working for you?
I love thinking about policy way more than campaigning. Sadly, the campaign part is the dominant part right now. I think that I've looked a lot to bar leadership in to start formulating what I want as from a culture and potentially from a policy perspective. But I and what I mean by that is I did the Colorado Bar leadership training, and I found that incredibly valuable to think about how we value people, how we value work, people's different strengths and qualities that they bring to the job, how to help people progress past things that may not be their strength. And then beyond that, also looking to the Women's Bar Association. And frankly, I thought this year's conference was incredibly impactful, that you lead from who you are, because that is your strength. And, can be very empathetic and I will cry. When I lead, I will be myself. And I think that, there is, a lot of the conversation that happened in that conference this year was around trying to fit into what we perceive to be a leader when we make when we step into those leadership roles. And sometimes that means leaving some of our strengths behind that we carry with us as women in this culture. And people like to define themselves as female in this culture. And maybe we should actually be using those traits. And so I think from the starting point, I have led this campaign and will lead the office from my strengths, which for me include, frankly, feminine characteristics and traits that I value, such as being empathetic and being kind and trying to really, again, building people up. The job is the job, and it's hard. It's a hard job. So I'm not going to be able to sprinkle fairy dust over the fact that being a line deputy is really hard work. But I also think that we can allow for people to be flexible in the office. We can allow, COVID, the silver lining has been that lawyers have finally figured out that it's okay if people work from home. I think that, as a working mom, I often was in the office less, but doing work at different hours of the day. And that we have to accept that that's how some people work best, given the structure and the strains that they have. And really also allowing people to set boundaries. So no, you don't have to respond to an email at 2:00. And so those are just some of the basic ways that I want to bring as the leader of the district attorney's office.
I love that. And kind of shifting gears for a moment here, for the listeners who are kind of thinking about someday maybe competing for an office and running for an elected office, and are also working moms just like you, what are some of the things when you decided that you were going to run that you kind of put in place as far as, when you were trying to make that decision, as far as balancing kind of work and the campaign? What could you tell them as far as that they can do it, and how did you kind of balance it all, and how have you been?
So I will say very honestly that I think that the concept of balance is a little overrated. I'm not really a balancer. I see everything, right, is that we have to, the greatest gift that I can earn or have is flexibility. So, when it came to thinking about running in earnest, gathered as much information as I could for people who had run. I spent a lot of time talking with my partner, and he is also a lawyer, and we have had times when my career has been dominant. We've had times where his career has been dominant, and we've gone back and forth. But we had to have a lot of conversation about it, and talking about, what if this happened? What if this happened? How would we handle it? Would we handle it? So the hardest thing for me too was to admit that I could not work full time and get this done. So it meant working part-time, which had budgetary implications. It had other scheduling implications. It also meant that we couldn't afford as much childcare. So really talking that through, and ultimately asking my parents to buy in and be involved in this process, because we couldn't do it alone. And so those were all the things that went into it. And then lastly, I'll say I went through the Emerge boot camp program. And Emerge is a wonderful training ground for women and also, frankly, a cohort. And those things together made a huge difference. But I needed family buy-in. I needed to have some honest conversations with myself about what this would look like. And then honest conversations with the campaign about where my time was best spent, knowing that I couldn't go to everything and be everywhere all the time.
And how far out are we to the election right now? You would know. Less than 6 months, right?
Yeah. Ballots drop October 9th. And then we'll need to get all those ballots back in and encourage everyone to cast their vote. So that'll be November 3rd.
So how early did you start planning for this? So we're less than 60 days away. Was it a year ago, 2 years ago? When did you kind of start the process?
Okay. So I left the bench as a magistrate judge in December of is that right? 2018.
Okay.
That's when the planning really started.
So January 19.
Mm-hmm.
19. So more than a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
then I announced my candidacy the first week of April 2019.
April of 2019. Great. Yeah. And I think one of the things, because I think you and I met in person a year ago. I don't know if it was a year ago. It feels like a year ago. And one of the things that I've really been impressed by throughout the process as an outsider and interactions with you is you always take the time to really personally interact with people. So I think there are political candidates that I've talked to who I feel like have kind of a veneer when you chat with them. They're like wearing a mask. And you, I feel like, get very present. You give all your attention to people. And that's probably one of the things about your personality. And then the other thing I noticed is even though you had so many events, like I would see every week a different event you were at, anytime I saw you at an event, you were very present. You were very energized. You weren't, whereas I feel like sometimes I'm with politicians and they're like off to their next event and they're not really present anywhere. So those two things for me really stand out for me in my interactions with you is just how present you are. Is there anything that I don't know if you've noticed that about yourself, but is there anything consciously that you do to really stay present and in the moment and with people throughout the process? Because it feels really great, obviously, as an outsider being around you. But is that a conscious decision, something that you've worked on, or is that just something that makes you the magic that is Alexis King?
Oh, magic. My husband says that I'm a terrible multitasker because if I'm responding to an email, I'm responding to an email. If I'm doing X, I am doing X. After I really started thinking about leadership, I really was more motivated to put my phone away. So I'll just say that was a very deliberate decision. I could do a better job every day. But I find that my partner is happier when I'm looking at him and not looking at him like this. My kids are happier, and it probably is, frankly, sometimes to the dismay of my campaign that I do take a while sometimes with people. But I struggle with that, the same thing, right, Pam? Like I've met very important people and still didn't really know them after shaking hands with them or having a brief conversation. And so I think that I instinctively want to make a connection with people and want them to know genuinely who I am. And then I would say this, and I don't know if this is true, but after being a mom and going through, the shift in your life where you find yourself pumping in a bathroom or whatever, I just don't have time to be full of baloney. I just don't. And so And so for me, I think that's where that comes from. And I just genuinely enjoy people, and I feel really passionate about the fact that I think the election of DAs has often been overlooked. I think a lot of people don't know what DAs do. I think a lot of people don't understand how much of an impact it can have on people in the community. And so I've also seen this less in a political way, but a lot of my conversations, even with other lawyers, are educational. And I enjoy that moment of teaching, in the same way that when you have a jury panel and people, are willing to chat and talk and share their experiences, I like that. And so for me, I don't know, that's what I dig on. And so this is a hard road. If I can find the part that I enjoy, I'll take it.
Do you feel like you had like any kind of biases towards what politicians were or what it would be like to run for office that now that you are in it have overcome or changed?
You know, I certainly have an idea of what, people who run for really high office are like. I still don't really know those people very well, even though I've now obviously crossed paths with people more and more. But I think that fear of superficiality was real for me at the beginning, and something that I definitely wanted to try to avoid. I also, but we'll say on the flip side, lawyers, I think, have a tendency to always think that they can figure things out and that they're probably right. That's what we do. And, I had to build a new type of team that I've never had to build before. And then I had to trust them. And I think that, that's, again, a leadership growing moment. And so, sometimes as a lawyer, I want to think about things, research things, process things, chase my tail for a while. And sometimes, we just have to call the ball and make a decision and move on. And so that's been a transition. And then the last thing I'll say is, you win some trials and you lose some trials, and you should spend as much time on the winning trial thinking about the win as you would thinking about the loss. And in this process, there are up days and down days, and you have to limit your dwelling on either. You have a great day, you put it in the box, you put your phone away, you go to bed. You have a down day, you put it in a box, you put your phone away, and you go to bed. And that kind of practiced resiliency has, I thought I had it as a trial lawyer, and I have only refined it further in this campaign process.
I love that. And so we kind of talked about, kind of as you were entering into the decision to run for office, all the things you put in place. And you talked about kind of really working with your partner to get on the same page. You talked about Emerge and how that was a good piece. And then you talked about really connecting with mentors and people who've been through it. And now that you're, so close to the finish line, we're on the end of the finish line here almost. Is there new things that you would have done differently, or advice that you'd give to someone now that you've gone through this whole process for the most part, you have the last part, who are thinking about maybe running for office or kind of supporting a campaign that they're interested in?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, it is really a growing experience. And I think at the beginning, it was very hard for me to be patient with myself, because I had been, a lawyer for, at that point, 12 or 13 years. I had been, I handled incredibly intense things. I'd led new projects. Like, I really felt like I was in many ways, the top of a curve. And then you get into campaign and you're at the bottom of the curve. You're learning again. You've never done this. And that's hard. I know, you have transitioned from different parts of legal practice, and you start fresh, and you have to learn again and make yourself anew. And, I don't know if I gave myself the patience at the beginning that I really needed. And so Thankfully, my partner did. But to have those people in your life and to really be willing to ask for help and support, which was also very hard for me because I had really figured out how to do my life for a while. And then my life changed a lot. And then we had a pandemic, right? And then life changed again. And I went 7 months without school or camps for 2 elementary age kids. So I feel like if anything, I've become more flexible and a little bit more centered in what I need to get done, how I want to do it. And frankly, that old adage of like, people don't always remember exactly what you said, but they remember how you made them feel, and to carry that through this bizarre time when I spend my days talking to voters and talking to supporters on the phone.
And you kind of mentioned having elementary age kids. And I'm curious to hear kind of one, how has kind of running for campaign kind of influenced your relationship with your kids? I'm sure it's kind of sparked conversations, and then vice versa. How has your role of a mom, especially during COVID, influenced your campaign?
So I will say the benefit of being a first-time candidate is that I had no expectations of what the last 6 months was supposed to look like. So I wasn't hanging on to, it's supposed to be like this. So when my team decided that we just needed to switch to phone banking, we just switched to phone banking. If we need to do text banking, we switched to text banking. So in a way, that was to my benefit. You tell me what we've got to get done, I'm going to go get it done. I think the interesting thing about COVID with the kids is that for the first time in their lives, they saw me working, saw it. We're all sitting at the dining room table together on laptops, saw it. And my professional life had always been something that happened between the time they got dropped off and picked up. And so in a way, they know a lot more about me now than they did before. And I think that that's kind of special. They have some really funny books that my mother-in-law has given them about campaigning. One of them is called Bad Kitty Runs for President. It's hilarious. But I think the one thing for them is just knowing that they always still come first, and they always will, period. And if anything, I think having this time at home, the silver lining is that I've always been a busy mom, and I think now they know a little bit more about why, but they really get to have more of me. And I really think that it's been very valuable. So incredibly stressful, sometimes incredibly aggravating, but ultimately really valuable because now they're sick of me and they want to go to school.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Alexis. And before we sign off, what is the best way for people to connect with you, to learn more about your campaign and as well, if they want to?
All my information is at alexisforda.com. And my email address and campaign phone number are on there. If you have questions, you want to reach out, you want to connect, just go to my website, and we'd love to hear from you. I try to be very accessible to voters and, frankly, folks who really care about criminal justice reform issues in the community.
Well, great. I will definitely include those in the show notes. Thank you so much, Alexis.
Thank you, Pam. Really appreciate you.
Hey mama, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Head over to my website, www.findpam.com, for all the show notes and links. And you will also get access to my free legal tool to name legal guardians. It's all right there at findpam.com.